Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to share with you some very helpful tricks that I have learned over the years concerning selections. So selecting is a very powerful and crucial part of effective editing. Whether you're doing complicated composites like I am with mixing real and fake elements into one photo, or if you're just doing normal editing, normal photography stuff like retouching or, just fixing simple photos. You need to learn how to effectively select what you want and not what you don't, and also to do it quickly so you're not spending a bunch of tedious time doing really tedious work or repeating that same work over and over. So basically this video is going to be broken into 4 pieces. First, I'm going to share with you how to grab a selection. That is where Photoshop is doing most of the hard work, finding a selection based on color, brightness, things like that, and it makes a selection for you. Very nice and quick. It does require tweaking, which I'll get to later. And the second part I'm going to tell you is how to draw and make your own selections. That's customly painting or selecting yourself. The third part is how to adjust your selection and make sure that it's grabbing the pixels that you want. And then lastly, I'm going to show you what you can do with selections, like how to use them. What are they for? What's the big deal? And the way that I use selections most commonly. Also, in my work, when I'm doing selections or retouching like this kind of Photoshop work, I'm using an Intuos Medium stylus tablet with a pen, and that makes selections so much easier. I hated using my trackpad on my laptop. Using a mouse is better, but still not quite as fun as a stylus. I'm a drawer. I am a physical artist originally before photography, so using a stylus pen really helps me. This is not an ad for Intuos, by the way. That would be great, though. If you're listening out there, Wacom, and if I'm pronouncing your name right, you can send me some money. That'd be great. Thanks a lot. If you can't afford the big name stylus, definitely check out monoprice.com. They've got some really cheap tablets. My brother has one. I think he got for just over $50. He does awesome concept art, fantasy, sci-fi stuff, and he's making some great work with a really cheap piece of hardware. Okay, moving on. My first method of grabbing a selection is going to be based on color. So this is when you've got a photo with, say, a background or an object or a piece of clothing that is a specific color that stands out on its own. So here in this image, I'm going to grab the background, which is obviously very red, and she is obviously very not red, which is going to work really in my favor for this. Now, sometimes you're not going to have such stark contrast in colors, but this method is good when you've got a photo like this. So to do that, I'm going to go to Select, Color Range. Now I haven't selected a color yet. See this little eyedropper? This is going to tell Photoshop what color I'm looking for. So I'm going to do the middle red color. See that white stuff there? That's what's going to be selected. If I click on the medium or the really bright ones, it's shifting around. I'm going to do the dark one. It's getting the dark band. But if I hold shift and click on additional colors in this image, it's going to look at those colors and it's going to add them to the selection. I've almost gotten all my spots. Oh, see now that white one included the skin tone. I don't know if I want that. I'm going to do Control Z. Going back, and this dark red, that white one I can probably get in manually myself. And this shadow red is not grabbing either. So let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. That's better. All right. So now I've got my selection roughly what I want. She looks kind of like Darth Vader here. I'm going to see what fuzziness does. It goes back and forth between how sensitive it is based on the color selections that I gave it to pick from. So you don't want to go too dark. You get a lot of grain and a lot of fuzziness. If you go a little higher, you don't go too higher, it's going to cut into her body, which I don't want. So I'm going to leave it right in the middle. With this selection, we see the marching ants or the marquee. That's the selection. Now, a good way to see what it is I'm going to go down here in the layers panel and hit mask. Boom. Now, the parts that are gone are the parts that were not selected. The parts that are present are the parts that were selected. If I hold Alt and click on the mask over here in the layers panel, now I'm looking at a black and white image. This is just the masking. So black is transparent or gone. White is present or opaque. And I can go in here with a brush and paint the parts that I don't want completely black. And conversely, I can flip-flop my colors with the X key and paint white what I do want selected. This is going to give me a 100% selection of the pixels that are white. So you see I'm using a brush to fine-tune and really finalize my selection. Okay, so now that I'm done doing a super quick job of refining my mask with brushing, I'm going to click on the image of the layer. Now we're back to normal mode. I'm going to single click on the mask and do Control I. Cool, now I've got the background gone. If you've got a solid color background like blue screen, green screen, a very bright, vibrant colored or white wall, you can use this technique to easily get rid of the background. And as with all the selections, it will require some further tweaking to get it perfect. No selection tool, well, very few selection tools are going to give you a perfect result right off the bat. All right, so that's the color selection tool. Another feature that's nice is the highlights, midtones, and shadows tool. So this is just grabbing the highlights and I can tell it how fuzzy, which is kind of like the edges, like how soft the edges are, and then the range. So how much of those highlights? Well, what exactly is a highlight in my opinion? I'm telling it, Photoshop, how sensitive I want it to look at, and it's going to make a selection out of the white pixels. Or I could do shadows, which is the opposite. Okay, another way for Photoshop to do the work for you is by using the Select Subject feature. So again, select drop down and go to Subject. Now it's thinking really hard, it's calculating. Boom, it just grabbed my subject and it drew an outline around them automatically. And you can see it's actually pretty decent. I think this was a feature that was introduced in the last or the version before last of Photoshop. It doesn't always grab everything. See, it kind of mixed his hand in with the concrete. Understandable, they're both kind of dark tones. Not a lot of color there. It didn't grab this middle section. That's okay, I can get that. So that just did a lot of work for me. Big time saver. If I do quick mask, boom, background's gone. Quick and dirty, needs some tweaking, needs some brushing, some refining. That's a given. But the subject selection tool is great and fast to get you started. And then you can work from there. And again, if you have a solid background that contrasts with your subject, it's going to work really easy. If you got someone that's blending in with a bright background and they're bright, or they're dark and they're in a dark background, this is not going to work very well. It can't tell what the pixels are as far as, what's foreground, what's background. So you're going to have a hard time. That's why it's important to get the photo correct and well done in camera so that later editing is much easier. And this is where lighting comes in, composition comes in, depth of field, because if the background is blurrier, I think that also helps it select your foreground subject. So I like to get some bokeh going on if I can manage it, because that will help later with the selection process. So there you go, subject select. Okay, the next way in Photoshop to make a selection with doing minimal effort is called the quick selection tool. And now this is kind of a hybrid of drawing your own selection and also Photoshop doing work on its own to help you out. So let's say I want to cut her out of this picture. I'm going to go to the selections drop down. We've got all our selection tools here. Rectangle, elliptical, we'll get those in a minute. And now there's a quick selection tool, which for me is W. I love this tool because it uses the brush, but it's also doing automatic selection. So I'm just going to click on her body and I'm going to drag down on her body. Look at that. It's automatically thinking, just like we did before with the subject select. And this is a little bit more customizable. I'm clicking and dragging over the parts of her body that I want. Get the arm in there. It's got a little spike there. It's grabbing onto pixels. It doesn't know. Now, because she's so white and bright with her dress, and the background is not like her, it's dark. Look at that. Pretty sweet selection along the bottom. That would be a nightmare to do by hand. Can you imagine? I used to do that all the time. It drove me crazy. I hated selecting. I hated compositing. I hated doing all this stuff until I found tools that make it easier. And now my workflow is so much quicker. Now, I got really lucky. This one was super easy. A lot of times it will grab additional things. Like let's say, it bled into the background. What you do then is hold Alt, and look at that. In the middle of my brush tool, it turned into a minus. If I let go, it's plus, because that's adding selections to my selection. If I hold Alt, it means minus, or you can click up here just to turn it into the subtraction tool or plus. But I'm going to hold Alt. And if I click in this section, it's going to take it out. I'm basically erasing the selection. Carefully dragging back to her arm. We still see a few little dots of marquee over here. Hold Alt, drag over those little dots. I don't want you. And you'll see it automatically select. It kind of like you draw the selection and then it thinks and it snaps onto the pixels, which is really cool. So as I hold Alt, I'm dragging over the selection I don't want and it's getting rid of it. I always use this tool when I begin to mask out a subject for a composite, where I want to put in a fake background or do special effects just to their body, like adding contouring, adding, I don't know, what a different kind of effects around something. I always use quick selection brush and I love it. Another tool similar to this is the magnetic lasso tool. So I really don't know why there's two. I feel like they're very similar, but basically it's going to be drawing along the edges of something, which is kind of what the select did. I guess this might be more customizable. I used to use this all the time until I found the easier version, which is the quick selection, like the brushing one that I just did. So I'm just dragging. I'm not holding. And to move, I'm going to hold space bar and see my cursor turn to a little hand. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but it's a little white gloved hand. And then I drag, and then I let go of spacebar, and I'm back to my tool. That is the best thing that I learned for selections, because you have to move, and you can't go grab the scroll bar, because it screws up what you're doing. So hold space, click, drag, let go of space. Boom. And I've gotten real quick with this. Like I've got my left thumb over my spacebar. My right hand is doing the stylus. Okay, so we're going to do two types of selections in this image. First, I'm going to change the color of his gun, which is obviously very red, so I can use color select to grab that, shift it over to a green, bluish color. Then I'm going to select around his body, and I'm going to show you how to tweak a selection by using the refine edges, which is the next point of this video. So select color range. I'm just going to hit on his red, maybe on a darker part of the red. There we go. And then maybe in the middle. Just a few taps. Don't overdo it. For me, Photoshop freezes if I overdo it, which is weird because I have a good video card, but it just freaks out. So there we go. Play with the fuzziness a little bit. All right, that's good enough. Now I'm going to make an adjustment layer of hue and saturation. And look at that. My selection I had went away, but where did it go? It went right over here to the masking of this hue and saturation adjustment layer. If I alt click it, there's my selection I just made. Now, if I click on the mask, here's a great tip. Do Control L, or you can use curves. If I play with the sliders here, I'm increasing the levels of my mask, which will make it much more clear and effective. I'm getting rid of the black pixels. There we go. That's good enough for this example. Click back to the normal view. And now watch this. I can slide the colors of the gun. Oh yeah. Bluish, and I'll drop the saturation. Nice. Nice. I like it. So before, after. That was quick and easy. Now there are some cracks that did not quite get into the selection. If I zoom in, look at that. There's still some black spots. You can use a brush, which is B, to fix all that up. Paint it in like that. I'll show you what it does. See that? I'm fixing the selection, which was not perfect. There's some shadows that still got in there. Cool. Okay, next part is I'm going to draw around his body using the quick selection brush, and then I'm going to refine it to make sure it's a little more accurate. So W. I want this W. There's two W's here. I don't know why that is. Quick selection tool is what I want. I call it a brush because it uses a brush. So I'm just click and dragging around his body. One foul swoop of a brush stroke. Oh, look, it grabbed some of his waist. So alt click that. Click down and drag. There's my little light stand back there. Oh, got his arms. So alt or minus that. Dragging up, dragging there, dragging between his arm. See how quick that is? That's amazing. I just did a basic selection of a body for an epic composite in like 10 seconds. Pretty sweet. A little hole here, which is blurry. We can fix that later. All right. So my selection looks great, right? But it may not be exact what I need. With your selection tool still selected, like I could still paint if I wanted to, you can look over here. I'm going to do select and mask ... It's going to bring up a tab over here that's going to allow me to tweak the selection based on the pixels below it. So it can kind of smartly identify contrast and grab onto things to make the selections much more accurate. And actually, I'm going to invert this. There we go. So shifting outwards, I can see some pixels of the sky around his body. It looks like fringing, especially his ear there. Does not look good. So if I slide it in, oh yeah, that looks nice. Nice and tight around the edges. Other tricks on here is, I'm going to put this back to 0, is smooth. So sometimes when you do this auto selection, it's really rough. It's just like straight jagged lines that are selecting things and it doesn't look pretty. So you can smooth those jagged edges out by using smooth. And it takes a second or two to calculate. There we go. Much smoother. Going back to how it was before. And it's a few bumps. It's really not that bad right now. But I've had selections that are super jagged and look awful. So yeah, smooth will smooth those out. Radius will... I don't know how to put it into words. I always use it. I don't know how to define exactly textbook definition of what it's doing, but I often put this up to a few pixels of radius and I check smart radius. For me, what I've seen is that this will grab onto the edges much more accurately. And unfortunately, you can't see it too well here. Let me put it to 0. Let it recalculate. Yeah, it kind of moves inwards on certain parts. I wish I knew more how to define that. I don't actually know everything. So there's that. Play with that at your own risk. Feather, let me put all these back to 0 so they're not really doing anything right now. Feather will just blur your entire selection altogether. Contrast will basically grab those black and white pixels of your selection, kind of like when we were looking at the mask, and it just adds contrast, which is nice because it'll sharpen things up. So you can smooth out the edges, have it intelligently grab onto some of the pixels that are soft and some that are not. I can turn up contrast to make it stronger. And we've got a pretty good selection around the edges of this kid's body. And that will help in, grabbing him out of this background and putting something awesome behind him. Okay, let's move on to some of the more direct selection methods, which is basically reliant on you selecting things yourself. There's no smart actions happening. There's no AI or intelligence grabbing onto pixels. It's all you. So for lightsabers, here's a good example. I use the Polygon Selection tool, Polygon Lasso, sorry. So I'm going to zoom in. Got it here, which I think is L. Yeah, L. And you have to click at your starting point. And look at this. I'm drawing a line. I'm going to use spacebar to move down, spacebar to move down, spacebar to move down, all the way to the tip of the lightsaber. Draw on the edge. Boom. Up again to the starting point here. Boop, boop, boop. You're literally drawing a polygon. In this case, it almost looks like a straight square, but it's got a little bit of curve. You can see that because I drew that personally. It didn't do that automatically. Down here, I drew a little bit of an edge too. So that's great for if you want to, grab something that's an odd shape, like a rhombus or a polygon of some strange kind. For me, I use this when I'm making lightsabers, like so. But I have a separate video on that you can find on my YouTube if you're interested in making lightsabers the right way, or my way, which is always the right way. You can watch that video and learn how to make some awesome lightsabers. The other selection tools that require you manually drawing and selecting things are the rectangle and the elliptical marquee. Also the lasso tool, which unlike before where we were drawing line-based polygons, the free lasso tool you can draw random selections just like so, which honestly I have not really found much use for unless I'm doing something quick and messy, just trying to grab something out of a picture for reference. It's great. You can use the elliptical lasso tool to select something circular. So if I click in the middle and I'm dragging, look at this, I'm drawing a circle from the center point. Now, what if I want to keep things in the center? Like if I want to center my selection, hold Alt. Now I'm drawing from the middle outwards. Pretty nice. Now, what if I want this to be a perfect circle? I can hold Shift in addition to Alt. So I've got my thumb on Alt, my pinky on Shift, and I'm drawing a nice circular shape here, like there. Now, if I do Control Shift I, it's going to invert my selection. So before I had the interior of my circle selected, right? So I could have deleted or I could have darkened the middle. But now I did Control Shift I, or you can go up to Select and Inverse your selection. Now I've got the outside selected, and I could make it dark like that, leaving the center circle untouched because I've only selected the outer region. Similarly, I can use the rectangular marquee tool to draw a selection like this. Let's make a dark border. Now remember, I just drew a square selection, right? So the interior is what's selected. I don't want that. I want the opposite. So Control Shift I, Control M for curves, drop the middle point down. Sweet, look at that. Cool. Got a dark border. Now what if I don't want the border to be as drastic or sharp? I'm going to draw that again. Control Shift I. Select and mask like we did before. And remember the feather? Look at that. It's blurring. Cool. So I'm going to hit OK. Now I've got that outer region border selected with blurring along this edge, which you can't see here, but it is there. Because watch, if I do Control M for curves again, drop the center point down, it's dark, but it's not drastic. Sweet, we got a vignette effect. Oh, something I didn't cover earlier was how to use the brush to make a selection. This is honestly my favorite way of selecting things. Other than doing the quick selection tool, which grabs around the person's body to cut them out from something, I love using the quick mask brush tool. So hit Q, which brings this thing over here, makes it dark, and your layer turns red because you're not actually painting onto your layer, you're painting onto a new selection. Look at that, see that red? That's the selection I'm making. So wherever I brush is making, I believe, the opposite of selection. So the exterior area is actually selected. It's kind of weird. I don't know why it's like that, but I'm going to undo. So I use lots of soft brushes. That's why I made these soft brushes, which is, I have another video about how to make brushes. And I made these soft brushes because the default brush in Photoshop just wasn't soft enough. So I made my own because I wanted to select areas very subtly. And let's see, for example, I want to make this shield brighter. So I'm in quick mask mode because that's dark and our layer's red. And I've got my brush. So I'm going to make it a little smaller. I'm going to just paint in a circle around her brush. So I made my selection. Let's say I'm done. I'm going to hit Q. Now it makes a selection, but see, it made it on the exterior of my red area. So I'm going to do Control Shift I to flip that inside. Now I've only got the shield selected. Now I'm going to do Control M for curves. Look at that. I could brighten up the shield if I wanted. I can make it darker and grittier. I'm going to undo that. Now I'm going to select just her face. I'm going to paint. I'm painting a selection. So I have the way I think of it. There we go. And a little bit of her hand. All right, Q to turn that off, Control Shift I to invert it, Control M for curves. There we go, and add some contrast to her as well. Sweet. The before and after. So I'm only applying a curves adjustment to the area that's selected, which is her face and her hand. And again, there's that fall off because I used a very soft brush to paint my selection. A very powerful tool, very customizable, and it saves me a lot of time and also allows me to edit specific areas of my image. And as I showed you earlier, I like to use my selections for adjustment layer masking. So let's say I want to turn the green down a little bit, but I still want to have control over it. So I'm going to use a hue and saturation adjustment layer to change that color saturation down lower. But way for me to grab just the green without me custom brushing or doing really tedious work, I'm just going to do select, color range, and I'm going to tap on a few of these green spots, a few different green colors for Photoshop to use. Let's see what the fuzziness slider does. Let's put it right around there and hit OK. I've got this crazy looking selection all over the place. And don't touch anywhere. You're going to mess it up. Go down to adjustment layers and make a hue saturation. There we go. Now look at this crazy black and white mask. That's what we just drew. That looks terrifying. And we can clean this up real quick by, again, clicking on the mask. I alt-clicked to get into this view, by the way. But once you've alt-clicked it, this is what you see. Do Control L. Let's bring up the darks, which is basically her. And then the whites, which is our actual selected parts. Black is not selected. There we go. Much cleaner. I can do some brushing if I wanted to, but I don't have time. So click back on the adjustment. I'm going to drag the saturation down. Nice desaturated forest. Although honestly, I'd probably oversaturate a little bit. Give it a fantasy look. But hey, you get the point. Very nice, very subtle. It looks pretty natural. There's not a lot of rough edges. There's a few little rough patches in here that we could fix. See that? You can paint it back in if you want later with a super soft brush, which I have a video about how to make those. But yeah, I hope you guys can see the power of selections and why it is super important to learn all the different methods so that when you've got a challenge or a request or something to retouch or remove, you know the easiest way. You could use all these methods to get something out of there, but there's always a best method, and that the one's going to save you the most time because time is money, and you don't want to be spending 30 minutes in Photoshop hand selecting something that you could have easily grabbed in about 2 seconds time. And boy, am I glad that I learned all those different tricks. So I hope you guys liked them too. If you love this video, if you learned something, comment, let me know what you like. If you had any questions, comment, let me know, and I'll answer them. And I would really appreciate it if you shared this video with your friends. Thanks for watching.